And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much.
4 minutes before the garden party was meant to settle into polished smiles and harmless conversation, Princess Anne saw something that changed the air around her. It was not a speech, not a guest, not a mistake in protocol. It was Queen Camilla, standing in full view, wearing Diana's emerald choker, and in that instant, Anne made a decision that turned a royal afternoon into a historic confrontation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne did not move at first. She simply stared, and the silence around her seemed to tighten. A royal garden party, a formal outdoor gathering where members of the family meet invited guests as a sign of national unity, was supposed to be safe ground. No battle, no scandal, no painful reminder of old wounds. Yet Camilla had arrived with that emerald choker at her throat, a necklace remembered not only as a jewel, but as a symbol tied to Diana's grace, suffering, and unfinished place in the royal story. Camilla smiled, as if nothing had changed. She reached for another greeting, another polite exchange, another soft sentence meant to carry the afternoon forward. But Anne's face had already hardened. The princess saw more than emeralds. She saw a boundary crossed in public. She saw a private wound being worn like a royal statement. And she knew, in that single freezing moment, that allowing the party to continue would turn silence into permission. A senior aide noticed Anne's expression before anyone else understood the danger. The aide, trained to read small shifts before they became disasters, watched her hand lower slowly at her side. He later described the moment in a documented palace account, saying her expression changed from surprise to absolute resolve. That account revealed the truth behind the halt. Anne had recognized the choker, understood it had not been cleared for this occasion, and quietly ordered the garden party to stop before the damage became impossible to contain. Camilla tried to continue. She turned toward the guests, held her posture, and kept her smile in place. But the queen consort could feel the atmosphere changing. Conversations broke apart. Glances moved from her face to the jewel and back again. Diana's name was not spoken, yet it filled the space between every breath. The monarch's wife was no longer simply greeting guests. She was standing at the center of a memory the family had never truly escaped. Anne stepped closer. She did not raise her voice. She did not create a spectacle. That made it worse. Her restraint carried the force of command, and the palace understood instantly that this was not about fashion, taste, or one afternoon's mistake. This was about Diana's legacy being brought into the open, without consent, without care, and without warning. Camilla saw Anne turn fully toward her, and the last layer of calm began to fall away. The garden party had been halted. The guests had noticed. The aides had frozen. And before anyone could soften the moment, the confrontation was already alive. But to understand why one necklace could stop an entire royal gathering, the story must first return to the people standing at the center of that impossible silence. Princess Anne did not react like someone offended by fashion. She reacted like someone guarding a line the family had promised never to cross. Queen Camilla, meanwhile, stood beneath the weight of every stare, trying to appear composed while the emeralds at her throat became impossible to ignore. Between them was not only Diana's memory, it was years of silence, judgment, and unfinished royal grief. Anne had always been the one who refused to soften pain just to make the room comfortable. She did not hide behind polished phrases when something felt wrong. Camilla knew that better than anyone. The queen consort understood that Diana's jewels were never only jewels. They carried memory. They carried loyalty. They carried the kind of public emotion that no palace statement could easily control. A royal heirloom means a treasured object passed through the family. But this choker carried something sharper than tradition. It carried a wound. Camilla tried to hold her ground. She kept her chin lifted. but the silence around her pressed harder with every second. She had worn the emeralds as if they could prove continuity, as if the monarchy could absorb every painful chapter and still keep moving. But Anne saw it differently. To her, the necklace did not show unity. It looked like Diana's private sorrow had been pulled into the open and placed before guests, as if the past could be managed by posture and rank. William noticed Anne from across the lawn. The prince saw the stillness in her face and knew at once that this was not a small disagreement. He moved closer without rushing, careful enough not to create alarm, but fast enough to show he understood the danger. William had spent years carrying Diana's memory in silence, and now that silence had been disturbed in front of everyone. The future king did not need an explanation. He only needed one look at the choker. Catherine lowered her eyes when she saw what was happening. The princess did not speak, but her reaction revealed more than words could have done. In a private account, later shared with a palace aide, Catherine described the moment as painfully heavy, because Diana's name never had to be said for the entire family to feel it. She understood that Camilla was trapped between dignity and humiliation, but she also understood why Anne could not let the moment pass. Camilla felt the judgment closing around her. She was not ready to remove the choker in front of guests, because that would look like defeat. Yet keeping it on now looked like defiance. The queen consort stood between those two impossible choices, while Anne's silence became a command stronger than any shouted order. Then Charles was informed. The king did not respond with anger first. He responded with fear, because he knew Anne was not acting from impulse. She had seen something before. She knew something before. And if his sister had chosen this moment to stop the party, then the real story had begun long before Camilla stepped onto the lawn. And that fear pointed backward to a hidden trigger, a private moment before the party that had set the entire confrontation in motion. The garden party did not truly begin on the lawn. It began 3 nights earlier, inside a private jewelry review at Clarence's house, when a velvet case was opened and Diana's emerald choker was quietly placed before Camilla. What happened in that room became the trigger everyone later remembered as the point of no return, because one warning was given, and one warning was ignored. Camilla looked at the emeralds with quiet confidence. She did not see danger at first. She saw history, status, and a chance to show that the monarchy could move forward without looking afraid of its own past. Clarence's house, one of the king's official royal homes, had become the place where delicate family decisions were handled away from public noise. That night, the jewelry review was meant to decide which heirloom pieces could be worn at upcoming events. A jewelry review simply means a private check of royal pieces before they are approved for use. But this one carried more weight than anyone wanted to admit. Anne entered late and noticed the choker almost immediately. The princess did not need a long explanation. She knew what it meant. Diana's emerald choker was not just an heirloom. It was tied to memory, grief, and public emotion that still lived inside the family. Anne saw the note beside the piece, marking it as restricted for highly sensitive occasions. Restricted meant it required special approval, because wearing it could create pain, scandal, or misunderstanding. And the garden party was exactly the kind of public event where one wrong symbol could turn into a storm. Camilla questioned the warning. She asked why the monarchy should hide from its own history when the crown needed symbols of continuity. The queen consort believed the emeralds could show strength, a message that old wounds no longer controlled the future. But Anne did not accept that. She answered coldly that continuity without respect would look like conquest, not healing. Her words landed hard. Camilla heard them, but she did not step back. Anne later revealed the exchange through a documented palace account prepared for senior aides after the garden party halt. In that account, the princess made one thing clear. She had warned Camilla directly. She had said, the choker should not be worn at the garden party. She had explained that Diana's memory could not be used as decoration for unity. Anne did not speak with anger that night. She spoke with certainty, and that made the warning even heavier. Camilla still made the request. The Queen Consort asked that the EmeraldChoker be considered for the event, even after Anne's objection. A palisade marked the request as not advised, meaning the staff believed it carried serious risk. Yet somehow, despite the warning, despite the note, despite Anne's words, the jewel appeared around Camilla's neck 3 nights later. Anne understood everything the moment she saw it. The princess did not believe it was confusion. She did not believe it was an innocent mistake. To her, the warning had been heard, weighed, and dismissed. That changed the meaning of the entire garden party. Camilla was no longer simply wearing a necklace. She was wearing the very decision Anne had told her not to make. So when Anne finally stepped toward Camilla in public, she was not reacting to a surprise. She was answering a warning that had been dismissed. The royal garden fell into a strange half-silence as Princess Anne approached Queen Camilla. No microphone carried their words, yet the people nearest them understood something serious was happening. Anne's posture was rigid. Camilla's chin lifted. And then, in the middle of a gathering built on control, 2 royal women faced each other over a jewel that carried a dead princess's shadow. Anne stopped close enough for Camilla to hear every word without anyone else needing to. The princess did not waste time with politeness. She told the Queen Consort the necklace should never have been worn at that event, not after the warning at Clarence House. The crown, meaning the royal institution and the public duty attached to it, could not be used to cover a personal choice this dangerous. Anne made it clear that Diana's EmeraldChoker had already been marked as emotionally restricted, which meant it carried deep public feeling and needed special approval before being seen at a major royal occasion. Camilla absorbed the words with controlled hurt. She did not step back. She did not reach for the clasp. She told Anne that she had a right to represent the monarchy without being treated like an outsider in her own position. The Queen Consort's voice stayed low, but the pain beneath it was sharp. She believed the family had accepted her publicly while still judging her privately. Anne heard that pain, but she did not soften. To her, this was not about Camilla's place. It was about Diana's memory being placed before guests, as if the past had no weight. William stood close enough to intervene, and the prince knew one wrong sentence could turn a private clash into a public rupture. He watched Anne's expression and understood she was not bluffing. Catherine remained still nearby, visibly shaken by the choker and by the silence it created around Diana's name. The princess did not need to speak. Her lowered eyes told William that the moment had already cut too deep. Anne then revealed, through words later recorded in a palace briefing note, that the EmeraldChoker had been flagged before the party. The princess said the restriction had not been vague. It had been direct. The jewel was not advised for the garden party because the emotional connection to Diana would overwhelm the event. Camilla heard that and looked away for the first time. The Queen Consort knew the warning existed. Anne knew she knew. Charles arrived before the silence could break. The king saw Anne's face first, then Camilla's, then the emeralds at her throat. He understood the shape of the disaster before anyone explained it. Anne demanded that the jewel be removed from the official party record, meaning the formal palace account of what had been worn and approved that day. Charles did not answer quickly. He looked at his wife, and she waited for rescue. Camilla's face changed when the rescue did not come. The Queen Consort saw hesitation where she expected protection. Anne saw the hesitation too, and so did William. Catherine felt the shift before a word was spoken. In that pause, the confrontation became something larger than blame. It became a test of where Charles would stand when Diana's memory and Camilla's dignity collided. Because the real power of the moment was not in Anne's accusation, it was in Charles's silence. King Charles had spent a lifetime learning how to survive impossible rooms. But this time, survival required a choice he did not want to make. His sister had halted a public royal event. His wife stood humiliated before the family. Diana's name hung over them without being spoken. And somewhere between duty and loyalty, Charles discovered that silence could wound more deeply than any command. Charles listened as the private explanation reached him. Anne had stopped the garden party because Camilla wore Diana's emerald choker without clear approval, and the king knew at once why the matter could not be brushed aside. Palace protocol, the set of royal rules that guides public events and family decisions, gave the monarch the power to override the halt. He could have ordered the gathering to continue. He could have protected his wife in that instant. But doing that would have meant rejecting Anne's judgment in front of everyone. Camilla looked at him with wounded expectation. The queen consort had endured whispers before, but this was different. This time, the humiliation had happened in the open, with guests watching and family members measuring every breath. She needed Charles to turn the moment back in her favor. She needed the king to show that her place beside him was not fragile. But his eyes moved from her face to Anne's, and the room seemed to understand the truth before he said anything. Anne stood with the force of someone who had already accepted the cost. The princess did not look angry now. She looked certain. She had warned Camilla before the party, and Charles could see that his sister believed the warning had been ignored. That mattered, because Diana's memory still carried deep public emotion, and one careless royal symbol could reopen years of grief. Anne was not asking for punishment. She was demanding that the family admit the line had been crossed. William stepped in quietly, but his restraint carried weight. The prince urged Charles not to defend the choker in public, because one visible defense could make the monarchy look careless with Diana's legacy. William did not attack Camilla. He did not raise his voice. But the future king made it clear that protecting the institution meant protecting the memory people still loved. Charles heard him, and Camilla heard him too. A palace aide then confirmed the detail that made retreat impossible. In a recorded briefing prepared after the confrontation, the aide stated that the jewelry note had warned against using the emerald piece at emotionally sensitive gatherings. That note mattered, because it proved the issue was not sudden outrage. It had been flagged before. The choker had carried risk before Camilla ever wore it into the garden. Charles made his decision without making a speech. The king did not reverse Anne's order. He did not command the party back into motion. He allowed the halt to stand, and that silence became the loudest ruling of the day. Camilla understood it instantly. Anne understood it too. William looked away, knowing the damage had already begun. Camilla stood exposed in the space Charles left behind. The queen consort had not been openly condemned, but she had not been defended either. And that was the first consequence. Before the guests had even left, before the palace could prepare its careful language, the garden party stopped being an event. Once Charles refused to undo Anne's order, the garden party stopped being an event. It became a verdict in motion. Queen Camilla did not break in front of the guests. She held her shoulders high, accepted the whispers, and walked away with the careful dignity of someone refusing to give the world a collapse. But behind closed doors, the strength began to crack. The emerald choker was removed. The clasp opened. And in the silence that followed, Camilla understood that the family had not simply challenged her choice, they had judged what it meant. Camilla sat alone, after aides escorted her inside. She could still feel the weight of the emeralds even after they were lifted from her neck. The garden party outside had been redirected with careful phrases, soft apologies, and controlled smiles, because palace staff knew the public could not be allowed to see panic. An official event record means the formal palace account of what happened, who attended, and which royal details were approved. That record mattered because it would decide how history remembered the afternoon. Camilla watched the choker return to its case under staff supervision. The queen consort did not reach for it again. She only stared as the lid closed, and that small sound carried more pain than any argument. The jewel had arrived as a symbol of strength. Now it was being handled like evidence. Camilla asked why Anne had chosen humiliation instead of a private correction. She asked why the princess had not waited, but even as she spoke, she knew the answer. Anne had waited once before, and the warning had been ignored. Charles entered quietly, and his silence followed him into the room. The king wanted to comfort his wife, but the words would not come easily. Camilla looked at him with hurt that had not yet become anger. She needed him to say that Anne had gone too far. She needed him to say the halt had been cruel. But Charles knew his silence outside had already spoken. He had allowed the order to stand. Now every gentle word sounded too late. Camilla then learned the detail that cut deepest. A palace secretary confirmed in a written internal note that the official event record would not include photographs of her wearing Diana's emerald choker. The queen consort understood what that meant. The palace was not only calming the scandal, it was removing the image before it could become permanent. Her choice would exist in whispers, not in the approved record. Anne had already requested an internal review. The princess wanted to know how the choker left storage despite the warning attached to it. An internal review means a private palace check into who approved a decision and whether rules were broken. That request mattered because it turned the emotional confrontation into something official. Camilla was no longer facing only Anne's anger. She was facing a process. Charles stood beside her, but the distance between them felt wider than the room. The king had protected the monarchy, yet he had left his wife exposed. Camilla understood that better than anyone. She had not been shouted down. She had been quietly overruled, and somehow that hurt more. Outside that room, the consequences kept moving. William and Catherine knew the family could not pretend this was only a private embarrassment. The prince carried Diana's memory with fresh anger, while the princess felt the sadness of a wound opened again. They would have to speak honestly now, with no aids, no polished statements, and no easy escape. And while Camilla sat with the weight of what had happened, William and Catherine faced the question the palace could no longer avoid. Away from aids, protocols, and whispered instructions, William and Catherine finally spoke with no one standing between them and the truth. The room was quiet. No announcement had been drafted. No palace statement had been approved. But the future king understood what the emerald choker had awakened. And Catherine understood something even deeper. Diana's memory could not be protected by silence alone. William stood with anger he did not want to show. He had watched Camilla wear the choker, watched Anne stop the garden party, and watched Charles freeze between loyalty and duty. Now the prince had to decide what his silence would mean. Diana linked jewels, meaning royal pieces strongly connected to his mother's public memory, were not ordinary items inside the family. They carried grief. They carried love. They carried the feeling of millions who still saw Diana as more than a former royal figure. Catherine listened before she answered. The princess understood William's pain, but she also understood the danger of turning that pain into punishment. Camilla had been humiliated, and that humiliation would not disappear simply because Anne had been right. The queen consort had made a choice that reopened old wounds, but Catherine knew the family could not heal one wound by creating another. That was why the moment mattered so deeply. It was no longer only about a necklace. It was about whether the monarchy could protect memory without becoming cruel. William admitted what had been sitting inside him since the garden party halted. The prince felt as if his mother's memory had been made into a contest, as if Diana's legacy could be worn, claimed, and softened for public unity. He did not shout. He did not accuse Catherine of asking too much when she urged restraint. But his voice carried the weight of a son who had watched the past walk into the present and demand an answer. Catherine reached for calm, not surrender. The princess told William that Anne's request for tighter control should be supported, but the response must not look like revenge. A palace response, meaning the official way the royal household explains or handles a crisis, would shape how the country understood the halt. If it sounded too harsh, Camilla would become the wounded figure. If it sounded too soft, Diana's memory would look unprotected. William decided then. The prince would support Anne's internal review and back stricter rules around Diana-linked jewels. In a private recorded conversation later summarized for senior staff, he made clear that the boundary was necessary. Catherine agreed, but she added one condition. The princess said the family must call it dignity, not punishment. Memory deserved protection. Camilla deserved humanity, and the monarchy deserved honesty. That quiet decision changed the direction of everything. William was no longer only reacting as a grieving son. He was thinking as a future king. Catherine was no longer only comforting him. She was helping shape the line between justice and mercy. Together, they turned the pain of the halted party into a boundary the palace could defend. By morning, what had begun as a private royal rupture was no longer contained behind palace gates. The next morning, Britain did not wake to a normal royal story. It woke to one image: Camilla leaving the garden party without the emerald choker visible at her throat, while Princess Anne stood behind her with a face like stone. That single frame moved faster than any palace statement. By breakfast, the jewel had become a symbol, and the nation was arguing about memory, power, and respect. Camilla became the center of a storm she could no longer control. The palace released a careful statement calling the halt a private matter of royal protocol, meaning an internal rule about how royal events and family decisions should be handled. But those words felt too clean for a moment so emotional. People wanted to know why the queen consort had worn the choker. They wanted to know why Anne had stopped the party. And they wanted to know why Charles had not publicly defended his wife. Anne was praised by many as the only person brave enough to protect a boundary others were afraid to name. Supporters said the princess had done what the palace should have done before the garden party began. To them, Diana's emerald choker was not just a necklace. It was part of a memory still carried by millions, and Anne had stopped that memory from being used without care. Her silence at the party now looked like strength. Camilla's defenders saw something different. They argued that the queen consort had been humiliated in public, when a private correction would have been kinder. They said Camilla had spent years trying to serve beside Charles, only to be reminded that some wounds inside the family would never fully close. Their anger was not only for the choker, it was for the way she had been left standing alone, with everyone watching and nobody rescuing her. Broadcasters framed the story as a clash between royal duty and Diana's emotional legacy. One morning presenter called it the most painful royal symbol in years, while another said the monarchy had been forced to choose between the woman Charles married and the woman Britain never forgot. That framing mattered because it turned the garden party from a family dispute into a national judgment. Then one London newspaper made the moment impossible to escape. Its front page carried the headline, "The Choker That Stopped the Crown," beside a cropped image of Camilla's bare neckline after leaving the party. The missing emerald said everything. The queen consort had worn the jewel into the garden, but the country saw her without it. That single image became the story. A small crowd gathered near Buckingham Palace before noon. One woman held emerald-colored flowers and told a reporter, in a recorded street interview, "Some things still belong to Diana." The sentence spread quickly, because it said what many people felt, but could not fully explain. Anne had halted the party, Camilla had suffered the shame, Charles had chosen silence, and William and Catherine had quietly helped shape the response. The palace could control the record. It could soften the language, remove the photographs, and speak of protocol. But it could not control the emotional truth. The public had already decided that this was not only about a choker, it was about respect. And in the end, the palace could control the record, but it could not control what the moment had revealed. When the noise faded, the garden party halt stood for something larger than anger, larger than jewelry, and larger than one afternoon of royal embarrassment. Princess Anne had not merely stopped an event, she had forced the monarchy to admit that certain memories cannot be borrowed for convenience. Camilla had not merely worn a necklace. She had touched a wound, still powerful enough to stop the crown in its tracks. Anne's decision did not disappear when the guests left. It moved deeper into the palace, into the records, into the private conversations no one outside was meant to hear. The palace concluded that Diana-linked jewels would now require stricter approval before public appearances. Diana-linked jewels means pieces strongly connected to her memory, her public life, and the emotional bond many people still feel with her. That new rule mattered, because the monarchy had finally admitted that some symbols carry more than beauty. They carry grief. They carry loyalty. They carry history that cannot be handled carelessly. Camilla was left wounded by the humiliation. The queen consort had walked into the garden, believing the EmeraldChoker could show strength and continuity. She left, knowing it had become proof of a boundary she could no longer ignore. Camilla understood that Anne's halt had not only judged the necklace, it had judged the meaning behind wearing it. And that was why the pain stayed with her. She had not been rejected from the family, but she had been reminded that acceptance did not give her ownership over every part of the past. Charles carried his own wound. The king had protected the monarchy by refusing to reverse Anne's order, but he had failed to fully protect his wife in the moment she needed him most. Charles knew his silence had saved the institution from a greater public storm. He also knew that silence had left Camilla standing alone. That was the cost. Duty had won, but love had suffered. William and Catherine gave Anne's action lasting force. In a private recorded conversation, later summarized for senior staff, the prince supported tighter control over Diana's jewels, while the princess urged dignity instead of revenge. Their quiet support turned the halt from one woman's severe reaction into a family standard. Anne had drawn the line. William and Catherine helped make sure it stayed. The official record softened the language. It called the halt a matter of protocol, a formal word for rules that guide royal behavior and public events. But everyone inside the palace knew the truth. Diana's memory had decided the outcome. Not anger, not gossip, not palace pride, memory. Anne's halt marked the moment the monarchy chose reverence over convenience. Camilla learned that some symbols could never be worn without consequence. Charles learned that silence can protect a crown while breaking a heart. And the family learned that Diana's legacy was not a chapter they could close whenever it became uncomfortable. The garden party ended in silence, but its meaning remained unmistakable. Diana's legacy had spoken, and even the crown had been forced to listen. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.